Well, good evening. I'm Alan Jackson, and welcome to Nashville. President Trump has had quite a few months running full speed with a lot of success, but nothing has been more of a challenge than how to address the trade negotiations with China. Most other countries have worked through their tariff negotiations with the White House, but our trade imbalance with China is $1 trillion. That's a lot of money heading out across the Pacific with not nearly as much in return. Well, like it or not, we buy a lot of things from China because, as we know, they're a lot less expensive than products made anywhere else. President Trump has made it clear that we're not looking to make T-shirts, sneakers, or socks, but we do want to grow our manufacturing sector and sell high-tech items and computer chips. Well, as Xi Jinping and President Trump head into their talks, they each have some leverage. The Chinese leader has been in power since 2012, and with no term limits, he could stay in power as long as the Chinese Communist Party allows it. President Trump, he's got a bit over 3 years left, so it's on their side. Well, there's one other part of Xi Jinping's history worth knowing. It's called the strategic stalemate. Xi was a student of the old Soviet Union, and he studied how the communists there went downhill, and he's determined to not let China suffer the same fate. So he wants to avoid a direct confrontation with Trump, and if needed, he'll hold his ground in an extended, all-encompassing, endless competition. Well, that brings us to our guest tonight, a familiar face on all things China. Gordon Chang, welcome back to our show.
Thank you so much, Alan.
You wrote recently about the fight China is having with the U.S. It's not a war in the terms we are used to, but it's a relentless attack on our economy and our military. The long game with the ultimate goal of becoming number one. This is how Trump sees it. Listen to his comments.
We have to do something about the deficit because we have a big trade deficit with China. Biden let it get up to $1 trillion. Think of it, $1 trillion deficit with one country. He let them just take them over the coals. We're not going to do that. But we're doing a rare earth deal, but we're also doing, remember, we have all of the airplane parts. They can't fly their airplanes without us. So we had, some cards also.
Do you think that President Xi has any intention of making a deal with President Trump?
Yeah, I'm sure they'll make a deal, and I'm sure they'll violate it. You've got to remember, we already have a trade deal in the second Trump term with China. It's the May 12th agreement. And in that agreement, China agreed to rescind its ban on the export of rare earths to the United States. But they didn't do that. And so what we have found out is that President Trump has now made additional concessions to the Chinese to get them to stop violating their trade deal. And so, I hope that President Trump has a longer-term plan. But of course, this gives incentives for China to continue to violate its trade deals with us. And this is going to be a very difficult conversation with China. So, yeah, they'll make a deal, but whether it's worth anything or not is another story.
With a trade imbalance of $1 trillion and the Chinese economy now in a weakened state, do you think the Chinese leader is going to be forced to take on levels of tariffs that he's unaccustomed to?
Well, I hope so, because that's exactly what we need to do. Remember, China is the trade surplus country, and that means it doesn't have the leverage. They need the U.S. market, especially because Xi Jinping has turned his back on consumption as the fundamental basis of the Chinese economy and is now relying on exports. He wants to export his way out of the situation. Also, the Chinese economy now looks like it's contracting. It's certainly in a deflationary spiral that is inconsistent with its reports of robust economic growth, such as 5.4% for the first quarter. That's just not really realistic. So, President Trump has a lot of leverage. Now, Trump, for various reasons, has decided not to use it, and we've heard comments from our president why. And so, we're going to have to see whether Trump is going to change his mind in terms of how far he's willing to go to protect the American workers and American society.
Well, one of the more interesting things about this negotiation is the fact that there's a codependence that's been in existence for a long time now. Help us understand what the Chinese need most from the U.S.
They need access to the world's largest consumer market. We account for something like 38 or 39% of global consumer spending. No other country comes close. No other market comes close. And especially because Xi Jinping, as I mentioned, has configured the Chinese economy so that its only hope is to export his way out of problems, which means he's placed the fate of the Chinese economy and, in effect, the fate of the Chinese political system in the hands of consumers around the world. And President Trump represents the most number of those consumers.
Well, our Agricultural Secretary, Brooke Rollins, has just announced a big federal strategy preventing China from purchasing America's farmland. Not only that, but she's also launching a plan to buy back some of the existing land that the Chinese have bought over the past several years. Congress has a bill in play as well that would ban land purchases near any U.S. military installations. Is that going to slow them down, or will they just put up more spy balloons?
Well, it'll slow them down, and it's something that we absolutely have to do. Got to remember that China has been using farmland in the U.S. not only for espionage, but we have seen even more disturbing uses of land. So, for instance, in Oklahoma, there have been human trafficking operations run by Chinese gangs based on agricultural land. And across the country, especially Maine, we have these illegal marijuana grows. But we have to also remember something else, and that is in June, the United States charged 3 Chinese nationals with trying to import biological agents into the U.S. The first 2 who were charged were trying to bring in a fungus, and that fungus, I suspect, was genetically modified to make it more dangerous to American farms. And it's also a fungus that affected livestock and humans. So I think that there was an attempt to plant invasive species in our country, especially because we've seen all of these reports over the last half decade of Chinese parties sending in seeds and other biological agents into the United States unsolicited. So this is very disturbing.
Well, Gordon Chang, I've got a lot more to talk about, so please stay with us for another segment. During our break, you can try logging on to ajnow.com. I'd love to see your thoughts on this discussion about China and our future with the Chinese leadership. I'll be back in a moment. We're back now with the preeminent China expert, Gordon Chang, the author of many great books, including the one called Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America. Gordon, you don't get any better of a negotiator than President Trump, but there's an overriding issue when anyone is dealing with the Chinese, and the issue is trust. You know, they spy on us. We all remember the balloon. They steal our best ideas to make their own copycat products. They send plainclothes Chinese military into our country, and Xi openly talks about war with the U.S. Well, the new CIA director, John Ratcliffe, summed it up this way.
When I was DNI for President Trump in his first administration, as you recall, we were accused of outsizing China as a threat. It was a peaceful China, right? And but you know, now after COVID, after the Taiwan aggression, after flying spy craft over the United States for 8 days during the Biden administration, stealing our intellectual property, taking advantage of us on trade, no one's saying that anymore.
Tell us, what does the Trump team need to know about making any sort of deal over tariffs?
I think the most important thing is that the Chinese political system right now is in turmoil, and we can see Xi Jinping is in trouble. He's probably lost control of the Chinese military, the People's Liberation Army, and there are signs that he is losing influence among civilian leaders as well. And so China right now is not a partner that we can actually deal with, I think. We don't know a lot about what's going on right now because the Chinese political system under Xi Jinping has become even more opaque. But we are seeing clear signs of instability in the Chinese capital. And so that's going to make it very difficult for President Trump to navigate this. And that's one of the things that Trump has said, that he said, look, we're not using our leverage because we're concerned about what's going to happen in China. And those concerns are very real. And that makes it even more difficult for the United States because we don't know if we apply all of our leverage, whether we will cause failure of the Chinese regime. That's entirely possible right now.
Well, I noticed something interesting during the attack on Iran. For all the talk about an axis of evil among Iran, Russia, China, and North Korea, China didn't come to the aid of Iran, at least as far as we can tell. What does that show us?
Well, it shows us that a number of things. That first of all, when you have relations among hardline states, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, they're not really that stable. And this has been something that we can see throughout history. But also there's another story here, and that is if we go back a year ago, China was dominant in the Middle East. It was chasing the United States out. President Trump comes in with his triumphal tour of the Gulf and through other policy initiatives, and he has China on the run. China has lost Saudi Arabia, Syria, and Qatar under the second Trump term, and it's losing Iran. So this has been masterful U.S. diplomacy by President Trump, and it shows that the Chinese are not as strong as they appeared.
You know, at the same time, we see the Chinese publicly advertising their military buildup. They're releasing videos of their latest warships and fighter jets. Is that to set the table for an eventual fight over Taiwan, or is it something larger?
Well, it could be Taiwan, Alan, but it could also be South Korea, Japan, the Philippines, or even far away Australia, or it could be a fight against us, because we see these very provocative challenges of America's ships and planes in the global commons. I think probably the most likely flashpoint would be against the Philippines for a number of reasons. But the point is, it could be any target. But we got to worry that Xi Jinping has personal incentives to lash out against some foreign country. And he would do that in order to prevent, not to rally the Chinese people, because the Chinese people right now do not want war. But he would do that to prevent other Communist Party figures from challenging further or even deposing him. So this is a Chinese political system that can take us by surprise.
So the possibility that President Xi would initiate a war to somehow secure or hang on to power isn't beyond reason?
By no means. It is, we can argue about whether it's probable or not, but I think that the probability of that is much higher than most Americans think. And I'm worried that we have a Pentagon that thinks about war, as they say, in 2027, and they're even preparing for war, not this decade, but next decade, by taking planes and ships out of service at a time we need it most. So we've got a real mismatch, I think, in perceptions. I believe that if we get over the next couple years, we're going to be okay. But not if we are purposely weakening our military now to make it stronger in the future. I think that's absolutely the wrong strategy right now.
Well, Homeland Security is working hard to round up as many of the criminals and illegals that walked right across the border the last 4 years. You've reported on the many young Chinese men who came in, often in groups, setting up fentanyl plants. Should Tom Homan and his teams be sending them back home as well, if he can find them?
Yeah, I think the number one priority of the federal government, not just Tom Homan, borders are, but the number one priority of the federal government right now should be breaking up China's networks in the U.S. Wow. Because we know that their agents and operatives and even people who have had links to the Chinese military have come across both our southern and northern borders. And we have been seeing at the same time a noticeable increase in the tempo of Chinese nationals trying to intrude into our military bases and conducting illicit surveillance of those bases plus the critical infrastructure. So we know that they're planning an attack. We know that they're studying our patterns and looking for our vulnerabilities. And I think that the only thing they're waiting for is a go signal from Xi Jinping. So this, I think, should be the number one priority.
Well, finally, the Chinese have opened banks in several big cities here, and are they trying to undermine the dollar or to make more inroads here, or just both?
Well, they've been trying to undermine the dollar for a very long time, and they've got banks in the U.S., and those banks we know have been, for instance, laundering fentanyl money and criminal money. And it's, I think, up to the President of the United States to apply Section 311 of the Patriot Act to declare those institutions to be of primary money laundering concern so that they can no longer conduct transactions in dollars. In other words, cutting their correspondent relations in New York. I mean, we didn't allow Pablo Escobar to run money through New York, so why are we allowing a much more dangerous China to do so?
Well, Gordon Chang, thank you for your time today. Hope you'll stay in touch as these tariff negotiations progress.
Thank you so much, Alan.
In a moment, some signs of hope. Stay with us. I'll be right back. You know, our experiences together since the start of this decade have been very insightful and very different than any previous experiences we've had. We faced a pandemic. China, the country where it originated, they hid the facts from the world, denied it, did their very best to cover it up, and they never suffered any true consequences for the devastation they unleashed. The Chinese government is communist, authoritarian, domineering. They've practiced slavery, social control, manipulation. Here's a little bit of global history. When communism came to the Russian people, tens of millions of people died. Lenin and Stalin butchered, terrorized, and people were murdered in the name of giving something to the people. What they actually gave to the people was a reign of oppression. China and Mao Zedong, with his great leap forward, resulted in 45 million deaths in 4 years. For decades, they held a one-child policy. They forced abortion. They committed female infanticide. There remains 15 million abortions annually in China. Communism is not just another economic system. It's one of the most destructive, murderous expressions of human authority in history. And the people who advocate for socialism and communism today in our nation, in our biggest cities, they have to deny history to do so. And it's only our profound ignorance that even gives them a place at all in the public square. Our First Amendment provides for freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom to worship God however we see fit without the interference of the government. Now that's ours to guard, that's ours to watch over. We'll maintain no liberties and freedoms that we don't stand up for. So it should matter to every Christ follower. We have to confront expressions of authoritarianism, control, opposition to free speech. Don't be silent around ungodliness. Don't lose your voice around things that you know are wrong. I believe with all of my heart that Christianity is the hope of humanity. Jesus changes us from the inside out. So we must be the voice of truth in this season of cultural change. If we will do that, I assure you there are more reasons for hope than despair. We'll be back in just a moment with your emails. Just a quick reminder, if you ever miss one of the live broadcasts, you can go to ajnow.com. There's an archive there with every program, easier for you to watch at your leisure. You can even share them with a friend if you choose. It'll help us all. Thanks for your emails. They're always a highlight. A YouTube viewer noted that one of the best things about this program is that the guests are given the opportunity to fully provide their answers to the questions. So many interviewers will ask a question and then interrupt the person answering before they can complete the thought. If you ask a question, let the person fully answer whether you agree or disagree with the person's answer. It's just common courtesy and makes the interview so much easier to listen to. Well, thank you for noticing. Our goal is to be an alternative to so many of the programs that give you the 15-second soundbite. We try to choose a guest and then explore a bit more in detail the topic of their expertise. We want to hear what they have to say, then we're free to form our own opinions. Nancy on YouTube commented, I might be confused about our government and people, but I know there is a God and He's my God. No one gets to decide about how, when, or where I worship. That ended with COVID and the government's lies. Bring back God to our schools and our courts. Well, Nancy, I agree. COVID was a wake-up call for many of us, and I think we are making some progress. It seems like truth is making its way into the public squares, and I'm looking forward to that becoming a part of our public education in new ways as we go forward. A viewer on YouTube commented, we so enjoy your common sense and biblically based comments on everyday issues we face in our culture. Well, I appreciate you noticing. We used to call common sense horse sense. I grew up in a barn. I guess I'm qualified to have a little horse sense. Patricia W. from Georgia wrote, I keep hearing people say that there are illegals that have been here for years. So my question is, if they've been here for years, why haven't they done something to become a legal citizen? Well, I don't know that there's a simple answer to that. I suspect the imagination has existed that there would be some political resolution that simply granted citizenship to all those people who've come here illegally. It's happened before in various ways. And I think there's a hopeful note that we're once again enforcing the border and treating illegal as if it were wrong. You know, the word illegal and criminal should go together. If you do something illegal, you should understand you're going to be viewed as a criminal. We've been a little confused on that point, but we seem to be gaining some clarity that is hopeful for all of us. Well, I appreciate you spending a few minutes with us this evening. I'm Alan Jackson, and you have a wonderful evening.